back to another video, and thanks for clicking on it, and I really hope you enjoy. So today I wanted to talk about prayer and fasting and what it means to be a Christian who fasts. I had originally thought I wouldn't make this video because of my personal struggles with understanding fasting and praying for myself, and I thought I had no position to make a video, but then I got like a pressing on the spirit that said, yeah, you're not here to preach and you're not here to know everything anyway. So, and just share honestly and genuinely what you've been learning. And so that is this video. So I wanted to, kind of talk about what fasting is. The things that I'm going to talk about in this video were actually inspired and based on a sermon that I watched. It's a sermon called The Power of Fasting by Stephanie Ike from Potter's House Church. I can leave a link somewhere. I want to be completely honest with you, is that fasting is still very new to my personal faith, and I never pursued it until much later in my life. And so the first time I fasted, I was at university. Boyfriend at the time, husband now, fasted with me. He was going on for like a week, but I barely got 3 days in because it was so new to me. Despite me sort of failing in a way because I had planned for a week but only got 3 days, I still got revelation from God, which is super cool. And it also just kind of showed me that it's not about reaching the 7 days or whatever amount of time that you had planned. It's not about that. It's really just seeking about God, and that's kind of what we'll be talking about in defining what fasting is. We're actually doing another fast. The young adults group at my church right now, we are going to host a fast. I'll be completely honest and say that I haven't exactly expressed the most excitement for this coming fast, only because I was having my own troubles with really understanding what fasting is. I was actually ashamed too. I was ashamed that wait, why would I loathe showing spiritual seeking and dependence on God in that way? My husband really encouraged me and helped me look at it in a different way, which really blessed me, and which now leads to me making this video with a smile because just an hour ago I was weeping. So first, defining what is fasting. Fasting, in a general definition, is the act of denying our fleshly natural selves of something, usually food, for the purposes of, spiritual or meditative alignment. As Christians, we are aligning ourselves with God, aligning ourselves with Christ, and seeking out Christ. So yeah, fasting usually is replacing something that you usually do in the flesh and for the flesh, and replacing that with doing something for your spirit and for God. If you find that you're addicted to your phone, you would fast from your phone, or fast from YouTube or social media as a way to help you acknowledge how much time you are spending. I spend this much time doing morning prayer or something, and seeing it level out and say, oh, actually I don't really spend a lot of time with God. So what is fasting then in practice? If that's just the general definition, what is it in practice? What does it look like? I've come up with 5 points, again based on Stephanie Ike. The first point is fasting is a sacrificial posture of our dependence on God. This one is kind of the big one of acknowledging what fasting is. Fasting is a sacrifice. It costs you something that you desire or spend your time with. It reveals your weakness and how you can find strength in God. Let's just use food because that is one of the most popular forms of fasting. When you are depriving yourself of your daily meals, that in itself helps you acknowledge, I am weak, where can I find my strength? in God rather than what I can do. It's like, God, the giver of my strength, please give my body supernatural strength to get through my tasks of the day, even though I'm not feeding my body the nourishment that it usually needs. On that note of like sacrifice, in 1 Chronicles 21:24, no, I will certainly pay the full price, for I will not take what is yours for the Lord, nor offer a burnt offering which costs me nothing. King David is saying, I will not do anything for the Lord that which costs me nothing. Is that if it costs you nothing, if it doesn't feel bad, if it's not hard to do, then you're not doing it right, because then you are living in your own comforts. You really aren't lowered, you're not humbled, you're not in a place where you really see that it is something that you are giving away to God. So in that way, fasting is a sacrificial posture. We're sacrificing and reminding ourselves that we are dependent on God. 2, fasting is an activity that brings about or brings you into spiritual possibilities or divine encounters. This one is both defining fasting but also sort of defining your benefit. We have a great example of, what fasting does through the story of Esther. Esther, she is a Jewish woman who is accepted into the palace and eventually becomes queen of Persia. There's this evil man, Haman, who hates the Jews, and he wanted to do away with them. And Haman was the king's advisor or something, and so he took that power of being the king's advisor to make a decree to allow people to kill Jews. See that Esther, acknowledges like, oh, maybe this is why God made me queen, was to put me in a place of authority to help her people. And so there is an account where she tells her uncle Mordecai to, tell the Jews to fast with me, fast and pray with me for 3 days. Royal law was different back then, but the queen was never allowed to enter the king's space on her own accord. She would have to be called. The impact of this situation is that if she did enter the king's throne room without being called, she would be killed. She calls her uncle to call a fast among her people and saying, I need to do something as queen, but I don't know how to do it. So we're all going to fast, and we're going to seek God's direction and wisdom. She was an example of tapping into this spiritual frequency of some kind. I like to view it as frequencies. If you've ever had experience tuning an old radio, not the ones in your car, like really an old one where like the little dial is slowly moving and you have to it's very sensitive to play around with it until you get like a clear frequency. Yeah, so she kind of tapped into a divine frequency. There's nothing in the natural that I can do, so I'm leaning on you, completely depending on you, God, and seeking spiritual direction. Because she tuned in, she was just infilled with direction and protection. In this way, Esther kind of shows that fasting with prayer kind of tunes you into the spiritual frequency of God, and allows you to really receive divine encounter. The third point is we fast as an expression of worship. If you have had any church experience, you would know that worship is not merely raising your hands on Sunday. It is so much more than that. Prayer is a form of worship. Tithing is a form of worship. And so in the same way, fasting is worship as well. When we fast, our focus is on God. It's just like how Esther was fasting with a specific purpose, and she was, like I was saying, tuning into the frequency of God. We are tuning ourselves in. We are putting away things that distract us in our daily lives. We replace things that kind of fill up our time with things of God. And so in that way, we are really putting God at the center of our day. That sacrifice and that seeking and that focus on God is a form of worship. Oftentimes, I myself have said, and I think many of us can attest, that there has been a point in our lives when we said that God wasn't listening. We get to this point where it's like, okay, is God even there? Like, my prayers are seemingly not being answered. God is never silent. That it is that, that frequency tuning that really opens up our ears, our spiritual ears to God. Influences of the world, distractions that keep us from really seeking God. So very slowly we become deaf to God's voice. Yeah, God is never silent. He's talking, but it's us that need to realign, tune in. And how we do that is by doing acts such as fasting and intentive prayer. It's getting really dark. Maybe I should turn on the light. It's ugly now. Okay. One super, impactful thing that I learned from the Stephanie Ike video is a quote that she read from John Piper, and I'll read it here. It says, "The absence of fasting is the measure of our contentment with the absence of Christ. If we don't feel strong desires for the manifestation of the glory of God, it is not because we have drunk deeply and are satisfied. Rather, it is because we have nibbled so long at the table of the world, or the influences of the world. Our soul is stuffed with small things, and therefore there's no room for that which is great." Well, that quote in itself just really puts into a picture where most of us find ourselves in our faiths. We usually come to a point where we're like, I'm not really getting anything from my faith. I feel like John Piper is talking about that state in which you find yourself. You're not really filling your spirit to its fullness because you're nibbling at something that's carbonated or whatnot, and it's making you feel full and making you feel like you've done enough, but really you haven't. And so I really was inspired and impacted by that. So all that to say is, yes, we fast as an expression of worship. The fourth point is that fasting puts the nature of the flesh under the authority of the Spirit. One truth to acknowledge is that it is the appetite of the flesh that which the enemy causes us to stumble and uses that to really get us down. The sin nature, our carnal nature, is one of our biggest drives. We were bound to sin and our sinfulness and our flesh. That was the main reason why Jesus came, was to bring us salvation from the chains of our sin. Carnal nature, our flesh, still can have the upper hand in our lives. And so, talking about the distractions that, we nibble at in our daily lives, it could be anything. It could be, work, or it can be an addiction that we're struggling with. It can be scrolling. It can be social media. It can be anything, really, that which takes God out of the first chair of our daily focus. And so in that way, because those things happen, that is the flesh taking authority. When we allow our distractions, we allow things to take priority over God, priority over prayer. Once we replace that priority, we are essentially listening to the flesh. And so fasting puts the flesh under and puts the spirit back on top. My last point is that fasting is not easy. When I talked about fasting being a sacrifice, it truly is a sacrifice, and it's not easy to do. And I truly experienced it today. I was loathing it because indeed, fasting is not easy, nor is it pleasant. My husband encouraged me in regard to, fasting not being easy. Fasting has a spiritual battle connected to it. Paul talks about it in Galatians chapter 5, starting in verse 13. You, my brothers and sisters, who were called to be free, do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love. And then he goes on to say, so I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the flesh desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the flesh. Therefore, they are in conflict with each other constantly. And then he also lists the fruits of the Spirit, which is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and right at the end there, self-control. So what he said before there, they are in constant conflict with each other. You are entering into a battle of your flesh while you're fasting. As much as I'm talking about it being like an act of devotion, an act of worship, and an act of glorifying God, yes, it is those things, but it's also a battle. Fasting and things of any kind of sacrifice for the glory of God or for worship of God is so hard, because it's like our flesh doesn't want to do it. It's always in contrary to the desires of the Spirit. There was a point in my life where I was going through something, and so then I had like a picture in my head where I saw two flames. One flame was blue and one flame was red, and the red flame was roaring. And then I saw the blue flame, which was small. It was barely there. It was like just embers. What those two flames represented was the flesh and the Spirit. I had like a bucket, kindling wood, and I had a choice to feed the red fire or feed the blue fire. That vision helped me, realize the two things that are fighting over our lives, the flesh and the Spirit, the continual fight for authority in our lives. Yeah, fasting can deprive the red fire. It's a choice, which fire to feed. And so in that way, fasting can be a way in which you're feeding the blue fire rather than the red. My husband shared with me as encouraging me. I said before that, I was feeling super shameful that I was loathing fasting. And so he showed me these verses here when Jesus was in the garden praying just prior to his crucifixion. Matthew 26, verse 38 and 39. Then he said to them, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. Going a little further, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, my Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet it is not my will, but as you will. What that taught me is that even Jesus himself, knowing that was his purpose in life, was to come and die. He was struggling with it. He resolved, yet not my will, but yours be done. That just really encouraged me in this feeling of loathing of fasting. Jesus himself loathed to die on the cross. In the book of Luke, in 22, 43 and 44, and he says in 43, an angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him. This account of the Gethsemane scene was that Jesus had prayed for strength. And so not only was he in this point of loathing the future, what he did to help himself was to pray, and an angel of the Lord gave him strength. And so that really encouraged me about my loathing and shame in regard to fasting. So thank you for watching this video. Thanks for getting all the way through it and truly watching the sun fade from behind me. I am super thankful for this video. I didn't think I was gonna make it, but by God's grace, I was able to overcome. And I hope this video helped you understand more about fasting, and I hope and pray that you would be convicted to give it a try. Big emphasis on the word conviction. Fasting is not something you should do without seeking out mentorship and knowledge If you intend to fast, seek God in knowledge about it. Seek God in understanding first. Don't go into fasting blind. May God go with you. May His presence go before you, and may God be with you in everything that you do. In Jesus' name, bye.